All right, this is the copyright disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. And this video is not for any monetary gain. It is explicitly for the reasons stipulated in the Copyright Act of 1976 under Section 107.
They sold tickets to a lynching. In 1911, in Livermore, Kentucky, a black man named Will Porter was dragged from a basement and tied to a stage inside the town opera house. He had been hidden there by the sheriff, fearing a mob would storm the jail. The mob found him anyway. What happened next was so twisted, it feels made up. But it's not. Organizers took over the box office, charged 50 men for seats, and turned the execution into a public performance. Balcony seats got one round. Orchestra seats? They could empty their weapons. The stage lights didn't work, so they did it in the dark, surrounded by fake trees meant for a children's play. About 200 rounds were fired. Half hit Will Porter. The rest ripped through the set. No one was convicted. The town moved on, but the NAACP did not. They called on the president. They demanded justice. But the three ringleaders were all acquitted. That was one lynching out of more than 4,700 across America. And that number doesn't even count the ones never recorded. Livermore never put up a plaque, never taught it in school, never said his name. But we will. Will Porter, April 20th, 1911. Livermore, Kentucky. Never forget. Follow Bluegrass Black Line for the truths Kentucky forgot.
This is the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 10, and it reads, For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rahakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well and teaching us this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be likened to the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners, and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you I say Shalom. This is your brother Ayashar Barazal, a prophet of doom from the Indianapolis branch of the Great Millstone, coming back at you with another lesson that is edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. And the opening scripture, I'll read it again. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. This is another installment of our camp series called For Thy Violence Against Thy Brother Jacob. And it is going into the atrocities, some well-documented atrocities that Esau Edom, who is a so-called white man, has done to the nation of Israel on this soil, both to the southern kingdom of Israel and the northern kingdom of Israel. All right, but before I get any further, again, just want to declare fair use according to the Copyright Act of 1976 as stipulated under Section 107. All right, it was announced at the beginning of the video. I just want to say it again. All right, now again, back to the scripture. The information, this internet has really shed a light on Esau Edom, which includes the head tribe of Edom, Amalek, the small hatters that have been occupying the land of Israel since 1948, and pretty much owned the entire U.S. Congress as well too. So just want to put that out there because it's a fact, has been exposing them. All right. and just the number of things that they've been doing uh, in terms of murder on Jake. Um, and here again is another article. It's from this site called On This Deity, but the one I picked this one because it was the most legible. You got a lot of old newspaper clippings on this particular event, and I'm going to talk about today about the lynching of Will Porter. He's just another one who, for whatever reason, they just chose. They just love killing Jake. All right, and we know that. All right. So yeah, and I'll put a link to this article in the description box. All right, you can find a lot more on yourself on your own. But let's go ahead and get into it. It says between 1882 and 1968, 4,743 lynchings occurred in the United States. And that's an astonishing figure, only accounts for those that were recorded. So there's a whole lot more we don't know of. And we're, finding out stuff every day. All right. It says behind every one of those 4,743 extrajudicial mob rule executions, there lies a tragedy. But today we're remembering a particularly sick episode. On 20th of April 1911, in the small town of Livermore, Kentucky, a black man named Will Porter allegedly, it's always the case, allegedly, no proof, all right, shot and injured a white man in a barroom brawl. Fearful that the jailhouse would be wrecked by local vigilantes, the local sheriff opted to hide Porter in the basement of the Livermore Opera House. The angry mob discovered the ruse, stormed the building, and after finding the terrified Porter hiding in the basement, bound him hand and foot and dragged him upstairs. Yeah, his location was disclosed. You know, his location was disclosed by that sheriff. You can't tell me any different. All right. It says, taking in the theater stage decorated with woodland scenery, one of the mob leaders was perversely inspired to turn Porter's fate into a public performance. The vigilantes took over the box office to sell tickets to the spectacle. Those in the balcony would be limited to one shot only, while those willing to pay extra for orchestra seats could empty their guns. 50 men in the admission 50 men paid the admission and took their seats to find Porter center stage, tied to a pole. The organizers were unsure how to turn on the stage lights, so the lynching occurred in an eerie semi-darkness. Of about 200 shots were fired, reported the New York Times. Nearly half entered the body of the black man, and the remainder tore into shreds the woodland scenery arranged for the presentation of a much milder drama. The sickening story of Will Porter might have been forgotten along with most of the other 4,743 plus lynching victims if not for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. Founded in 1909, the NAACP vowed to wage war on this gruesome practice. Now, now that we're at this point in our life, that even that organization is funded by the small hatters, the ones who not only finance the transatlantic slave trade, but they own the ships, all right, and the insurance companies that insured our bodies. So, yeah, a lot of these organizations with all those letters and acronyms, belong to them, all right. It says, following the American Civil War, the lynching of African Americans in the southern and border states became an institutionalized method to terrorize blacks and maintain white supremacy. Hangings, shootings, burnings at the stake, maiming, dismemberment, castration, lynching was a peculiarly American combination of racism and sadism. Okay? Widely held to be acceptable, newspaper articles regularly told of determined men seeking to give black brutes a hearing in Judge Lynch's court. The federal government, having abandoned post-war pledges, betrayed African Americans through its persistent failure to enact a federal anti-lynching law. On June 13, 2005, the United States Senate finally formally apologized. Man, you know what you can do with that apology. For real. Yeah, it's all smoke and mirrors because you're still doing the same stuff. It says, Louisiana Senator Mary Landrieu noted, there may be no other injustice in American history for which the Senate so uniquely bears responsibility. As for the tragic case of poor Will Porter, 2 weeks after his death, the NAACP adopted a resolution condemning the lynching and sent letters to President William Taft, Congress, and Kentucky Governor A.E. Wilson, who demanded the arrest of the lynchers. Warrants were issued for the arrest of 3 ringleaders who were separately indicted and tried on the charge of murder. All were acquitted. All right, and we already know what scripture pops up. This is Psalms 73 and 5. It says, they are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. All right, yeah, that's the truth. You know, in every single one of these videos we've been doing, you know, even if they were jailed, you know, it was overturned. You know, we're close to 140 of these now. Same playbook, all videos. Okay, same playbook. Different times, different people, different places, but the same playbook. All right. And no, they are not plagued like other men. You know, as the scripture saying, Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hands of the wicked. You know, he can write laws that are, grievous to us. You know, Isaiah 10 and 1. You know, and he can get away with it. You know, it's because he's in control right now, and this is part of our punishment as a nation of Israel. But then again, you know, he has to pay for this, you know, for everything that he's done. He says, therefore pride compasses them about as a chain, violence covers them as a garment. You know, when you see them, you know, that's their attire, that's their apparel, you know, decked out in violence. You know, Esau Edom. But he has to pay for and he will pay for these things. He will pay for these things. You know, they couldn't just kill him. You know, they profited off of his death. All right, which is the same thing it's going right now. You know, Jake falls out on the street. You know, they get him in time. You know, they're gonna get that melanin, get those body parts. You know, you're starting to see stories where the bodies of folks are not even in the casket when it's time to bury them. You know, taking the melanin from Jake. You know, yeah, it's just you know, this man has to pay for all of his damage to Jake, and he is. All right, that violence is just something else, and you know, like I said, that they make sport of it. You know, 200 rounds fired at this man, and he can't move. You know, got him tied up for an alleged accusation, and that's all it took in those times was an accusation against Jake. All right, that's all right. You know, his stuff, his day is coming, and it's near, and they know it too. That's why they getting all bent out of shape now. Want to cut out history. You know, remove stuff from the museums. You know, this is Ezekiel 35, going straight to the point. Verse 5 and 6. You know, you start at the top, it's talking about Mount Seir, which is Esau Edom, who is the so-called white man and the wicked. Okay, according to Malachi 1 and 4. All right. It says, verse 5, because thou hast had a perpetual hatred and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword, and we know that sword can be any killing instrument. you know, any killing instrument, or or something that brings, a devastating harm. Okay. He says, by the force of the sword, in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. Okay. And, hey, those curses are starting to switch over, you know. And between that time, a lot of Jacob's about to get judged. We see what's going on in D.C. right now, which is really going to spread everywhere else. It's prophecy. It has to happen. That's why Jake needs to do their best to be on the right side. Um, verse 6, it says, therefore, as I live, saith Yahweh our power, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee, since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. Right. Blood is going to pursue you, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, for what you have done. I just saw an AI thing today, and that stuff is getting pretty good. But unless you know the scriptures, you're going to be caught out there. For an example, they bring up these stories about these aliens that are so-called African American coming here in 2 weeks. Well, you got a lot of people out there believing that, but the scripture says, and this is from the mouth of the Lord, Yahweh Shai. All right, he said, no man know the day or the hour, when he's supposed to return. All right, only the Father in heaven knows, Yahweh. All right, so while you people are, being bamboozled by what NASA is saying, and NASA we know means deceiver. You can't look that up anymore now. You have to go to this site called Quora, and they're documenting everything. Who looks up what? You got to sign in. Pretty much what they're trying to do here with us getting on the internet. Looking at who's looking up what. All right, but yeah. So it says, since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. And why is that? You're going to have to pay for what you did. All right? Because of all your bloodshed. This is Numbers 35 and 33. And it reads, so ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are, for blood it defileth the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. Yes, Esau, Edom. When I see these old clips of, the reason why you do what you do, because you're afraid what you did to us is going to happen to you. Yes, it is. And righteousness, though. Some of the stuff y'all did to us, we can't do according to the scriptures. Like the whole buck breaking and all that stuff. Messing with other men's wives. Okay, we have to be in righteousness. But yeah, this is the true reparations right here. Your bloodshed. And how is that bloodshed going to come? How is this land going to? It's going to be cleansed by your blood, but who's going to be responsible for that? Of course, it's at the will of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, but it's going to be by the hand of his people, the ones you have been wrecking havoc on since the beginning. This is the book of Joel, chapter 3. Again in verse 19. It says, Egypt shall be a desolation. All right, and America is modern day Egypt, the house of bondage. You had Nero or Trump already say, he's cutting off stuff to where people can't come in and people can't leave. All right, so it's bondage. He says, in Edom, that's the nation of Edom, the so-called white man, shall be a desolate wilderness. Okay, that's your land too. All right, it says, for the violence against the children of Judah, that's the southern kingdom of Israel. Okay, your so-called Negroes, Haitians, and your West Indians and your Jamaicans. All right, we see that attack coming right now. All right, it says, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. Yeah, that's what you're doing. Killing us at will. All right. verse 20, it says, but Judah shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. All right, Judah dwelling forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. Okay, that's the Judah's, like I said, the southern kingdom, Jerusalem, the northern kingdom. You know, we coming back together, dwelling forever and dwelling from generation to generation. That means immortality. You know, in the kingdom, we're gonna have those new bodies. Okay, gonna have that new bodies. You know, everything new. The law, statutes, and commandments are going to be on our inward parts. All right. It says, for I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed. For Yahweh Bashem Yahushai dwelleth in Zion. And how is he going to cleanse that blood? I just read it for you in Numbers 35 and 33. The only way, you know, you can atone for defiling this land with our blood is having your blood spilt as well. You know, that's why I said that blood shall pursue you. Since in Ezekiel 35, since you had no problem shedding our blood, hey, when the time comes, yours will be shed as well. Thus saith the Bible. Now, you so-called wacky tacking Christians, you get mad at that all you want to. You know, I didn't write it. I'm just telling you, as I'm commanded to do. You know, cry loud, spare not. You know, I'm showing you, what's that, Isaiah 58 and 1. You know, prophesying to you wicked kingdoms, Jeremiah 28 and 8. All right? That your time is coming. And it's near. The elites know it. That's why they're doing everything they can do. And they got this puppet in place trying to wreak havoc on the nation of Israel, both northern and southern kingdom. All right? Yeah. You are going to pay, you know. And in that story, you know, they just rush to judgment, you know, just straight rush to judgment. The scriptures tell us in Exodus 23, you know, let me just go ahead and grab that. Exodus 23, 1 and 2 says, thou shalt not raise a false report. That's those alleged accusations. Those are all of them were false reports. And it says, put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Okay? And that's what they did. Took an accusation and made sport of this man's death. All right? He says, thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment. That's exactly what you did. You know, you didn't have the truth. We all know it wasn't the truth. Jake just didn't go around back then, you know, starting stuff with Esau Edom, the so-called white man. He wanted to be at peace. But you knew if there was an accusation, you know, that was a death sentence. You know, anytime you brought a harm to a so-called white man or a white woman, that was a death sentence back in that day. All right, and that's still happening. You know, you seeing what's going on with these truckers just trying to do their job. All right. So yeah, Esau Edom is going to have to pay for what he has done to Jake. All right. You get go down in that Obadiah 1 and 18. I'll prove that again. Just what I just said in Joel. This is Obadiah 1 and 18. It says, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. Okay, Jacob representing the southern kingdom of Israel. Joseph representing the northern kingdom of Israel. It says, and the house of Esau, the so-called white man, who includes the 1948ers, you know, dwelling in the land of the state of Israel right now, and you know, really just, you know, destroying the Palestinians, you know. And this is in no way of support of that, but, you know, hey, of what's going on over there, because they had a hand in our demise too, you know. First Maccabees 2:10 says, "What nation have not taken part of her spoils?" You know, every nation has put their hands on us. Daniel 9, chapter 9, verse 9 through 14 tells you no other nation on earth has been through what the nation of Israel has been through. And then you look at it, the stuff that the United States put all those other nations to, they have, those nations have been paid. They receive some form of reparations. Not the children of Israel, no. But that's okay. That's okay. We like what the Lord, especially the hopeful elect, we like what Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai says about, the reparations for you. All right? Once this kingdom is established, you go into slavery twice as long and twice as hard as we did, but in righteousness. Okay? And after that, like Obadiah 1:18 says, hey, let me continue reading that. Start at the top again. It says, "And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble, rounded up and burnt up, nothing but ashes." A cremation. Just like, you cremated a lot of us alive. Yeah. At the very end, that's what's going to happen. All right. He says, "And they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau. For Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai has spoken it." Okay? Now, you want to say that this is preaching hate? No, we're preaching the Bible. Preaching the Bible. It's always been there. Even your own president, Ronald Reagan, the one who put the drugs, in all the communities with the crack and stuff, look it up. Executive Order number 5018, signed February 3rd, 1983, declaring the Bible to be the law of the land. I bet he didn't know this was in there. I bet he didn't know this was in there. If he did, he probably wouldn't have done that. But, it's too late now. That's y'all president. All right? Once again, you all going to have to pay. Every nation who put their hands on us will be paid. But like, what's that, the Zondervan Combat Bible Dictionary? It said Edom is the only neighbor of the children of Israel that will not receive mercy. There will be no mercy for what you did, the same manner that you had no mercy on us. And how do I know that? This is the book of Amos, chapter 1, verse 11. And it reads, "Thus saith Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, that sin upon sin upon sin, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword." Okay, that was your blessing. Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. Go back to Genesis 27, between verses 31 and 48. The sword is your blessing. Okay, "and did cast off all pity." You had no mercy for Jake. Look at the books like Without Sanctuary. Even this one. You had what's called spectacle lynchings. Many people attending those things as if it would a circus or Super Bowl. Selling body parts after he's done. You didn't maim them. Yeah. He says, "And did cast off all pity, no mercy, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever." We see that right now today. With the steps that Nero is currently taking. With the jobs, people losing their jobs and not being hired too. That's that great wrath that's spoken of in Revelations 12 and 12. The beginning of it. All right. But you're going to have to pay. And I'll close out with this. This is the book of Revelation. Chapter 13, beginning at verse 9. It says, if any man have an ear, let him hear. Any man with understanding, let him understand. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. We have been under Esau, Edom's captivity for the longest. Okay? Going all the way back to the Greeks and Romans. Then you had the Dark Ages. After Jake took Rome down. All right? And then they came back into power during the Renaissance period. The 1300s. And here we are right now to this day in 2025, still under his captivity. All right? Verse 10 again from the top. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword, that was your blessing, must be killed with the sword. So yeah, what you did to us, you're going to get it back in righteousness. It says, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Who are the saints? The Israelites. According to Psalms 55 and 6. You can see it again in Psalms 148 and 14. Okay? Those are your real saints, the Israelites. All right? So with that, I hope this lesson was edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. Once again, I'm going to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rahakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also, salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners, and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you, I say Shalom, Kwam Yasharallah, Abba Babal. We got next. Shalom.